Picture this. It's 2 a.m. on a foggy highway in rural Texas. A young man spots a girl in a white dress, shivering on the roadside. He stops to help. She gets in, whispers an address, then falls silent. When he reaches the destination and turns around, the back seat is empty. Confused, he knocks on the door. An old woman answers, her face turning pale. "That's my daughter," she whispers, tears rolling down. "She died in a car accident on that highway 20 years ago tonight." This is the terrifying legend that has haunted American roads for generations. Let me tell you a story that will make you think twice before picking up strangers on dark, lonely roads. This isn't just any ghost story. This is the legend of the Vanishing Hitchhiker, and it has been scaring Americans for almost 100 years. Every country has its own scary tales, but America's highways hold some of the darkest secrets. From the misty roads of California to the empty stretches of Texas, people have reported the same strange experience over and over again. They pick up a hitchhiker who mysteriously disappears before reaching their destination. Now, you might be thinking, come on, this is just made up to scare people. But here's the thing that makes this legend so terrifying. Hundreds of people from different states, different times, and different backgrounds have all told almost the exact same story. They don't know each other. They've never met, yet their experiences are incredibly similar. The story usually goes like this. A driver is traveling alone at night on a quiet highway. The road is empty and there's barely any traffic. Suddenly, in the beam of their headlights, they see a figure standing by the side of the road. It's a young woman, usually wearing old-fashioned clothes, sometimes a white dress or a prom gown. She looks cold, scared, and desperate for help. Being a good person, the driver stops. The young woman gets into the car, usually sitting in the back seat. She's quiet, barely speaking. When the driver asks where she needs to go, she gives an address in a soft, sad voice. Sometimes she mentions a specific street or neighborhood, then she goes silent again. The driver continues down the dark road, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror. The woman sits there, staring out the window with empty eyes. The car fills with a strange coldness that the heater can't seem to fix. An uncomfortable feeling settles in the driver's stomach, but they keep driving, wanting to help this mysterious passenger reach her home safely. As they get closer to the address, the driver might try to make conversation. "Are you okay? Do you need me to call someone?" But the woman doesn't respond. She just stares ahead, her face pale in the dim light. Finally, they reach the destination. The driver stops the car and turns around to tell the passenger they've arrived. But when they look at the back seat, their blood runs cold. The seat is completely empty. The woman has vanished into thin air, as if she was never there at all. This is where our terrifying journey begins. Jerry continued driving through the foggy Chicago streets, his mysterious passenger silent in the back seat. The city lights flickered through the mist, creating strange shadows inside the car. Every few minutes, Jerry would glance at the rearview mirror, and each time he did, an uneasy feeling grew stronger in his chest. The address the woman had given him was about 20 minutes away from the cemetery. As he drove, Jerry noticed something really odd. Even though the heater was blasting hot air, the inside of the car felt ice cold. It was the kind of cold that goes right through your bones, making you shiver no matter how many layers you're wearing. "Are you sure you don't want my jacket, miss?" Jerry asked again, looking at her through the mirror. "You must be freezing in that thin dress." But there was no response. The woman just kept staring out the window, her face expressionless. Jerry thought maybe she was in shock or had been through something traumatic. He decided to just focus on getting her home safely and let her family deal with whatever was going on. As they drove deeper into the residential neighborhood, the streets became quieter. Most houses were dark, with only a few porch lights still on. Jerry started looking for the house numbers, trying to find the address she had given him. Finally, he spotted it. A small, old-fashioned house with a dim light glowing in the front window. "We're here," Jerry announced, pulling the car over to the curb. "This is the address you gave me?" He put the car in park and turned around in his seat to tell the woman they had arrived. But what he saw made his heart stop. The back seat was completely empty. There was no woman, no white dress, nothing. It was as if she had never been there at all. Jerry's hand started shaking. He quickly turned on the interior light and checked the entire back seat. He looked on the floor, under the seats, everywhere. The doors were still locked from the inside. There was no way she could have gotten out without him noticing. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what just happened. "This can't be real," he whispered to himself. "I'm going crazy. She was just here. I saw her. I talked to her." But the evidence was clear. His passenger had vanished into thin air. Jerry sat there in his car, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Part of him wanted to just drive away and forget this ever happened. But another part of him needed answers. He needed to know what was going on. Jerry sat in his car for what felt like an eternity, staring at the empty back seat. His mind was spinning with confusion and fear. He checked the door handles again. They were still locked. There was absolutely no way that woman could have gotten out of his car without him hearing or seeing something. "Maybe I'm just tired," Jerry tried to convince himself. "Maybe I imagined the whole thing." But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. He remembered every detail. Her pale face, her white dress, the way she shivered in the cold, the sound of her soft voice giving him the address. Jerry looked at the house in front of him, small bungalow with peeling paint and an old wooden porch. One light was on inside, glowing warmly through the curtains. He made a decision. He had to know what was happening. Couldn't just drive away and spend the rest of his life wondering if he was losing his mind. Taking a deep breath, Jerry got out of his car. His legs felt weak as he walked up the cracked sidewalk toward the front door. The neighborhood was completely silent, except for the sound of his footsteps and the distant barking of a dog. The cold night air bit at his face, but Jerry barely noticed. His mind was focused on getting answers. He climbed the 3 steps to the porch, and the old wood creaked under his weight. Jerry stood there for a moment, his hand raised to knock, wondering if he was making a huge mistake. What would he even say? How could he explain what just happened? Finally, he knocked 3 times. The sound echoed in the quiet night. Jerry waited, his heart pounding. He heard shuffling footsteps from inside the house, and then the porch light flickered on. The door opened slowly, revealing an elderly woman in a nightgown and robe. She looked to be in her 60s, with gray hair and tired eyes. "Yes? Can I help you?" she asked, looking confused and a bit worried. It was very late for unexpected visitors. Jerry swallowed hard. "I'm so sorry to bother you at this hour, ma'am, but something really strange just happened, and I need to ask you about it." The old woman's expression changed slightly. Something in her eyes suggested she had heard this before. "What is it, young man?" she asked quietly. Jerry took another deep breath. "About 10 minutes ago, I picked up a young woman near Resurrection Cemetery. She was wearing a white dress and she gave me this address. She got in my car, but when I arrived here and turned around to tell her we'd reached her destination, she was gone. She just vanished." The old woman's face went completely pale when Jerry finished speaking. Her hand gripped the door frame tightly as if she needed support to keep standing. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared at Jerry with wide, tearful eyes that seemed to hold years of sadness and pain. "Please," Jerry said softly. "I know this sounds absolutely crazy, but I swear I'm telling the truth. I'm not drunk or on drugs. This really happened to me tonight." The old woman nodded slowly. A single tear rolled down her wrinkled cheek. "You're not the first person to come to my door with this story," she whispered. Her voice was shaky and filled with emotion. "You're not crazy, young man. Please come inside. I need to sit down." Jerry followed her into the small living room. The house smelled old, like mothballs and lavender. Pictures covered every wall and surface. Most of them were black and white photos from decades ago. The old woman sat down heavily in a worn armchair and gestured for Jerry to sit on the couch across from her. "What you experienced tonight," she began, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief, "has happened to many people over the years. At least once or twice a year, someone knocks on my door with the exact same story. They picked up a young woman in a white dress near the cemetery. She asked to come to this address. Then she disappeared from their car." Jerry felt his skin crawl. But how is that possible? Who is she? The old woman stood up slowly and walked to the fireplace mantel. She picked up a framed photograph and held it close to her chest for a moment before handing it to Jerry. "This is my daughter, Mary. She was only 17 years old in this picture." Jerry looked at the photograph and his blood ran cold. It was her. The same woman he had picked up tonight. The same blonde hair, the same delicate features, the same white dress. "This is impossible," he breathed. "Mary died 12 years ago," the old woman continued, her voice breaking. "It was March 13th, 1927. She had been to a dance at the local high school. She was so beautiful that night in her new white dress. She was so happy, so full of life. A boy was supposed to drive her home, but they got into an argument, and she decided to walk instead." The old woman paused, struggling to continue. Jerry sat frozen, the photograph trembling in his hands. "She was walking along the road near Resurrection Cemetery when a car hit her. The driver didn't stop. They never found out who did it. My baby died alone on that cold road, still wearing her beautiful white dress." Jerry felt sick to his stomach as he listened to the old woman's story. He looked down at the photograph again, studying every detail of Mary's face. There was no doubt about it. This was the same person who had sat in his back seat just 20 minutes ago, Mrs. ... Jerry started realizing he didn't even know her name. "Mrs. Henderson," she said softly. "Please, call me Margaret." "Mrs. Henderson? I don't understand. How can this be happening? How can your daughter, who died 12 years ago, be appearing to people on the road?" Margaret walked back to her chair and sat down with a heavy sigh. "I've asked myself that question 1,000 times. I've talked to priests, psychics, and investigators. Nobody has a real answer. But I have my own theory about why Mary keeps coming back." She looked at Jerry with eyes full of ancient sadness. "I believe my daughter is trying to come home. On the night she died, she was walking toward this house. This was the last place she wanted to be. She died before she could make it here, before she could see me one last time. I think her spirit is trapped, endlessly trying to complete that final journey." Jerry felt goosebumps rising on his arms. "But why does she disappear? Why doesn't she just stay in the car until we bring her to your door?" "I don't think she can," Margaret explained. "From what other people have told me, Mary always vanishes when the car gets close to this address. It's like there's some invisible barrier she can't cross. Maybe it's because her physical body never made it home that night. Her spirit keeps trying, over and over, but it can never complete the journey." The old woman reached for another photograph on the side table. This one showed Mary's grave at Resurrection Cemetery. "I buried her in that white dress. It was her favorite. She had saved money for months to buy it for the dance. She was so proud of it." Margaret's voice cracked with emotion. "I couldn't bear to bury her in anything else. I wanted her to look beautiful, even in death." Jerry didn't know what to say. He sat there holding the photograph, trying to process everything he had just learned. Part of him still couldn't believe this was real. But the evidence was right in front of him. The photograph matched perfectly, and Margaret's story explained everything that had happened tonight. "Does she appear on any specific dates?" Jerry asked. "Like the anniversary of her death?" Margaret shook her head. "That's the strange part. It doesn't seem to follow any pattern. It happens at different times throughout the year. Sometimes on rainy nights, sometimes on foggy nights like tonight. The only constant is the location where people see her. It's always near the cemetery gates. Margaret stood up and walked to an old wooden desk in the corner of the room. She opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder stuffed with papers. "Over the years, I've kept records," she said, bringing the folder back to where Jerry sat. Letters, newspaper clippings, witness statements. "You're far from the only person this has happened to." She opened the folder and spread some of the papers across the coffee table. Jerry leaned forward, his eyes scanning the documents. There were handwritten letters, typed statements, and even a few newspaper articles with headlines like "Ghost Girl Haunts Highway" and "Cemetery Phantom Puzzles Police." "This letter is from 1933, Margaret said, picking up a yellowed piece of paper. "A traveling salesman named Robert wrote to me after his experience. He picked up Mary on a snowy December night. Just like you, she vanished from his car before they reached this house. He was so shaken up that he went straight to the police station. They didn't believe him until they came here and I showed them Mary's picture." Jerry picked up another letter. This one was dated 1936. "Dear Mrs. Henderson," he read aloud, "I am writing to tell you about an encounter I had last week that I cannot explain. I was driving home from work when I saw a young woman in a white dress standing by Resurrection Cemetery." The letter went on to describe the exact same experience Jerry had just gone through. The quiet passenger, the cold interior of the car, the mysterious disappearance. Every detail matched perfectly. "How many people has this happened to?" Jerry asked, amazed at the pile of documents in front of him. "I've documented at least 40 cases over the past 12 years, Margaret answered. "But I'm sure there are more. Not everyone comes to my door. Some people are too scared. They think they imagined it or that nobody would believe them. Some probably do, and even know about this house or that they should come here looking for answers." Jerry shook his head in disbelief. "This is incredible. Why hasn't this been bigger news? Why isn't everyone talking about this?" Margaret gave a sad smile. "Some newspapers have written about it, but most people dismiss it as superstition or lies. In the Depression years we're living through, people have bigger problems to worry about than ghost stories. Besides, the phenomenon is inconsistent. Mary doesn't appear every night. Sometimes months go by without an incident. Then suddenly several people will report seeing her in the same week." She pulled out a small notebook. "I've been trying to find a pattern, but I can't. I've tracked weather conditions, moon phases, dates, times. Nothing seems to predict when she'll appear. It's completely random, which makes it even more frightening." As Jerry continued looking through the documents, something caught his attention. It was a newspaper clipping from 1935 with the headline "Mysterious Jacket Found at Cemetery." Picked it up and began reading. "What's this about a jacket?" Jerry asked, holding up the article. Margaret's expression became even more serious. "That's one of the strangest parts of this whole mystery. Sometimes, when Mary appears, she leaves something behind, physical proof that she was really there." Jerry felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean? What kind of proof?" "Read the article," Margaret said, pointing to the newspaper clipping. Jerry read aloud. "Local police are investigating a peculiar discovery at Resurrection Cemetery. A taxi driver named Thomas Murphy reported that he picked up a young woman near the cemetery gates last Thursday evening. The woman asked to be taken to an address on the north side. Murphy claims that when he arrived at the destination and turned to collect his fare, the woman had vanished from his locked vehicle. However, Murphy discovered that the woman had left behind a man's suit jacket on the back seat. The jacket was soaking wet, despite the fact that it had not rained that evening." Jerry looked up at Margaret with wide eyes. The jacket was wet. Margaret nodded. "Thomas had offered his jacket to Mary because she looked cold, just like you did tonight. According to his statement to the police, she actually accepted it and wrapped it around her shoulders. When she disappeared, the jacket was left behind on the seat, but it was dripping wet and ice cold, as if it had been sitting in freezing water for hours." "That's impossible," Jerry whispered. "The police tested the jacket," Margaret continued. "They confirmed it belonged to Thomas. It was definitely his jacket. But they couldn't explain why it was wet, or why it was so abnormally cold. The temperature of the fabric was measured at near freezing, even though it had been in a heated taxicab. Jerry felt his hands shaking. Did anything like that happen with other witnesses? Margaret pulled out another document. Yes, in 1937, a young couple picked up Mary. The wife offered her a scarf because she looked cold. Mary took it and wrapped it around her neck. When she vanished, the scarf was left behind on the back seat, completely frozen solid. It was so stiff with ice that it couldn't be bent. The couple had to let it thaw out for hours before it became flexible again. But that doesn't make any sense, Jerry said. How can something turn to ice in a warm car? Nothing about this makes sense, Margaret replied sadly. That's what makes it so terrifying. We're dealing with something that breaks all the rules of the natural world. Margaret put the documents back in the folder and looked at Jerry with a serious expression. There's something else I need to show you. Something that might be even harder to believe than everything I've already told you. Jerry wasn't sure he could handle anything more bizarre than what he'd already heard, but his curiosity was too strong. What is it? Come with me tomorrow morning, Margaret said. I want to take you to Mary's grave at Resurrection Cemetery. There's something there that you need to see with your own eyes. I can't properly explain it with just words. Jerry agreed, though. Part of him wanted to forget this entire night ever happened. But he knew he couldn't. This experience would stay with him forever. Before he left Margaret's house that night, she gave him one more piece of information that made his blood run cold. There's something specific about Mary's gravestone, Margaret said as Jerry stood at the door preparing to leave. Over the years, people have reported seeing strange marks on it. Handprints, to be exact. Small handprints that appear on the stone, as if someone has been trying to push it or climb over it. Handprints, Jerry repeated. Like someone touched the gravestone. Not just touched it, Margaret corrected. The handprints are burned into the stone. It's actually burned in. Like someone pressed their hands against the marble while their skin was burning hot. Several groundskeepers at the cemetery have tried to clean them off, but they always come back. Cemetery officials eventually gave up trying to remove them. Jerry felt dizzy. Are you saying the handprints belong to Mary? I don't know for certain, Margaret admitted. But the size matches Mary's hands. I compared them once, using a photograph where you can see her hands clearly. The prints on the gravestone are the exact same size. And here's the really disturbing part. According to some witnesses who claim to have seen Mary at the cemetery gates, she sometimes has burns on her hands. Red, angry burns that looked fresh and painful. Jerry's mind was reeling. Why would a ghost have burns? Some people think Mary is trapped between two worlds, Margaret explained. The world of the living and the world of the dead. Maybe the barrier between these worlds is causing her pain. Maybe every time she tries to cross back into our world, it burns her somehow. I don't have answers, Jerry. I just have theories and too many sleepless nights wondering what my daughter's going through. That night, Jerry barely slept. He kept replaying everything in his mind. The pale face in his rearview mirror, the empty back seat. Margaret's sad eyes and folder full of impossible stories. When morning finally came, he was exhausted but determined. He had to see Mary's grave for himself. The next morning, Jerry met Margaret at the entrance of Resurrection Cemetery. The sun was shining, and the cemetery looked peaceful and ordinary in the daylight. It was hard to believe that this was the same place where he'd seen Mary's ghost just hours before. Margaret was waiting for him near the gates, wearing a long black coat and carrying fresh flowers. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "I know last night was difficult for you." "I had to come," Jerry replied. "I need to understand what happened to me." They walked together through the cemetery grounds. Rows and rows of gravestones stretched out in every direction. Some were old and weathered, while others were newer and well-maintained. The morning was cold, and their breath formed small clouds in the air as they walked. "Mary's grave is in the older section," Margaret explained as they walked down a narrow path between the stones. "We buried her near a large oak tree. She always loved trees. When she was little, she would climb the trees in our backyard and refuse to come down for dinner. Jerry could hear the pain in Margaret's voice. Even after 12 years, the loss of her daughter was still fresh and raw. He couldn't imagine what it must be like to lose a child, especially in such a tragic way. After about 5 minutes of walking, Margaret stopped. "Over here," she said softly. Jerry looked at the gravestone in front of them. It was made of white marble and had Mary's name carved into it along with her birth and death dates. Mary Elizabeth Henderson, born April 3, 1910, died March 13, 1927. Beloved daughter, forever in our hearts. But what caught Jerry's attention immediately were the marks on the stone. Just as Margaret had described, there were handprints burned into the marble. 2 small handprints, positioned as if someone had pressed their palms against the stone with incredible force. The marks were discolored, darker than the rest of the marble, and they looked almost like scorch marks from a fire. Jerry reached out slowly, his hand trembling. He placed his own hand near one of the prints for comparison. The ghostly handprint was much smaller than his. It was the size of a teenage girl's hand, Mary's hand. "Touch it," Margaret encouraged him. "Feel it." Jerry hesitated, then gently placed his palm directly over one of the handprints. Marble felt strange. It wasn't just cold like regular stone. It felt unnaturally cold, like touching ice. But there was something else too. Strange tingling sensation, almost like a weak electrical current, ran through his fingers. He pulled his hand back quickly. "That's not normal," he said, his voice shaking. "That stone shouldn't feel like that." "I know," Margaret said sadly, placing her fresh flowers at the base of the gravestone. As Jerry and Margaret stood at Mary's grave, an old man approached them, wore dirty work clothes, and carried a rake over his shoulder. His face was weathered and wrinkled from years of working outdoors. He looked to be in his 70s, with white hair peeking out from under a worn cap. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson," the man said, tipping his cap respectfully. His voice was rough and tired. "Good morning, William," Margaret replied. "This is Jerry. He had an encounter with Mary last night." The old groundskeeper's expression changed immediately. His eyes grew serious, and he looked at Jerry with a mixture of sympathy and concern. "Another one, huh?" William said, shaking his head. "That makes 3 this month alone. She's been more active lately." 3? Jerry asked, surprised. 3 people have seen her this month. William nodded. "I've been working at this cemetery for 40 years, and I've seen a lot of strange things, but nothing compares to what happens around this grave. I've tried to tell my supervisors about it, but they don't want to hear it. They say it's bad for business, scares people away from buying plots here." The groundskeeper set down his rake and stepped closer to Mary's gravestone. "See these handprints? I've tried everything to remove them. Scrubbing chemicals, even professional stone cleaners. Nothing works. And the strangest part is, they seem to get darker over time, not lighter. It's like they're growing stronger instead of fading away." Jerry felt another chill run down his spine. "Have you ever seen Mary yourself? Her ghost, I mean?" William was quiet for a moment, as if deciding whether to share his story. Finally, he spoke. Only once. It was about 5 years ago. "I was working late one evening, finishing up some maintenance near this section of the cemetery. The sun had just set, and it was getting dark. I heard footsteps behind me, light and quick, like a young person running." He paused, his eyes distant as he remembered. I turned around, and there she was, a girl in a white dress, standing right there by the oak tree. She was looking at me with the saddest eyes I've ever seen. She didn't say anything, just stared at me. I blinked, and she was gone, vanished like smoke. "Were you scared?" Jerry asked. "Terrified," William admitted, "but also heartbroken. The look on her face wasn't angry or evil. She looked lost and confused, like a child who can't find her way home." After that night, I started leaving flowers on her grave every week. I figured if she's trapped here, the least I can do is make sure her resting place looks nice." Margaret smiled sadly at the groundskeeper. "That's very kind of you, William. I'm sure Mary appreciates it wherever she is." After leaving the cemetery, Jerry couldn't stop thinking about everything he'd witnessed. Over the next few weeks, he became obsessed with learning more about the vanishing hitchhiker phenomenon. He visited libraries, read old newspapers, and talked to anyone who would listen about his experience. What Jerry discovered shocked him. The story of Mary Henderson wasn't unique. All across America, similar reports were popping up in different cities and states. The vanishing hitchhiker wasn't just a Chicago legend. It was becoming a nationwide mystery. In California, a truck driver reported picking up a young woman on Highway 101 near San Francisco. She wore an old-fashioned dress and asked to be taken to an address in the city. When he arrived, she had disappeared from his locked truck cab. The driver went to the address and met an elderly couple who showed him a photograph of their daughter. She had died in a car accident on that same highway 15 years earlier. In Georgia, a businessman traveling through rural areas picked up a teenage girl on a deserted country road.
Oh.
She was barefoot and wearing a nightgown. She gave him an address, but would unexplain why she was out there alone in the middle of the night. When he reached the destination and turned around, his passenger was gone. The family at that address confirmed that their daughter had died years ago while sleepwalking. She had wandered onto the road and been hit by a car. In Texas, multiple people reported seeing the same ghost on a highway outside of San Antonio. A young Hispanic woman in a white wedding dress would appear on foggy nights, trying to flag down cars. Those who stopped for her said she would get in the vehicle, give an address, then vanish before arriving. Local legends said she was a bride who had died on her wedding day when her car crashed on that highway. The pattern was always the same. A young woman, usually dressed in white or formal clothing, she appears on a lonely road, usually near the location where she died. She asks for a ride to a specific address. She remains quiet during the journey. Then she mysteriously disappears before reaching the destination, leaving the driver confused and terrified. Jerry collected newspaper clippings from all over the country. He created a map, marking every location where a vanishing hitchhiker had been reported. The pins covered almost every state. From Maine to Florida, from Washington to Louisiana, the phenomenon was everywhere. But why? Why were these spirits appearing on American highways? Why were they all young women? And why did they all disappear before reaching their destination? Jerry had so many questions and very few answers. He decided he needed to talk to experts. People who studied ghosts and paranormal activity. Maybe they could help him understand what was really going on. Jerry's search for answers led him to Professor Edmund Hartley, a paranormal investigator and folklore expert at Northwestern University. Professor Hartley had spent 30 years studying ghost stories and supernatural phenomena across America. If anyone could explain the vanishing hitchhiker mystery, it would be him. Jerry called the professor's office and was surprised when Hartley agreed to meet with him immediately. "I've been studying this particular phenomenon for years," the professor said over the phone. "Your first-hand account would be invaluable to my research." 2 days later, Jerry sat in Professor Hartley's cluttered office. Books about ghosts, folklore, and mythology were stacked everywhere. Strange artifacts sat on shelves, old photographs, mysterious objects, and handwritten journals. The professor himself was a thin man in his 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes and wild gray hair that stuck out in all directions. "Tell me everything," Professor Hartley said, leaning forward in his chair. "Don't leave out any details, no matter how small they seem." Jerry recounted his entire experience, meeting Mary near the cemetery, the cold car, her disappearance, conversation with Margaret Henderson, the handprints on the gravestone. The professor listened intently, occasionally taking notes in a leather journal. When Jerry finished, Professor Hartley sat back and stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Your experience is textbook," he said. "It matches hundreds of other reports I've collected over the years. The Vanishing Hitchhiker is one of the most common ghost stories in American folklore, and it follows a very specific pattern." "But why does it happen?" Jerry asked desperately. "What causes it?" The professor stood and walked to a large bookshelf. He pulled out a thick volume and flipped through the pages. "There are several theories," he explained. "The most common belief is that these spirits are what we call residual hauntings. The ghost is replaying the final moments of their life, stuck in a loop that repeats over and over, like a recording." "Hey." "Exactly like a recording," Professor Hartley confirmed. "Think of it this way. When a person dies suddenly and traumatically, especially a young person with unfinished business, their final emotions and intentions can become imprinted on a location. Mary was trying to get home when she died. That desperate desire to reach her mother's house was the last thing on her mind. That powerful emotion got trapped, and now it replays whenever conditions are right." "What kind of conditions?" Jerry wanted to know. The professor shrugged. "That's the mystery. Weather seems to play a role. Many sightings occur on foggy or rainy nights. The time of night matters too. Most encounters happen between midnight and 3 in the morning. But we don't fully understand why some nights trigger an appearance and others don't." Jerry felt frustrated. So there's no way to stop it, no way to help her move on. Professor Hartley's expression became sad. "That's what I've been trying to figure out for 3 decades. Professor Hartley returned to his desk and opened another book filled with his own handwritten notes and sketches. "Let me explain something important about ghost hauntings," he said. "There are generally 2 types, residual hauntings, which I just mentioned, and intelligent hauntings." "What's the difference?" Jerry asked, leaning forward with interest. "A residual haunting is like a video recording," the professor explained. "The ghost doesn't actually interact with the living world. It simply replays the same scene over and over, like a movie stuck on repeat. The spirit isn't truly there in a conscious way. It's just an echo, an imprint of energy left behind." Jerry thought about this. "But Mary got into my car. She spoke to me. She gave me an address. That doesn't sound like a recording to me." Professor Hartley's eyes lit up. "Exactly. That's what makes The Vanishing Hitchhiker so fascinating. It shows characteristics of both types of hauntings. In some ways, it's repetitive, like a residual haunting. Mary always appears in the same location, wears the same dress, and tries to go to the same address. But in other ways, she seems to be an intelligent spirit. She responds to people. She accepts help. She communicates." The professor walked to a chalkboard on the wall and began drawing a diagram. "I believe Mary and others like her are trapped in what I call a spiritual loop. They're aware enough to interact with the living, but they're unable to break free from the pattern of their final moments. It's like being stuck in a nightmare you can't wake up from." Jerry felt a deep sadness wash over him. That sounds horrible. "Being trapped like that for years, maybe forever?" "It is horrible," Professor Hartley agreed. "And here's what makes it even more tragic. These spirits usually have what we call unfinished business, something they desperately needed to do before they died. For Mary, it was getting home to her mother. She never completed that journey, and now her spirit is condemned to keep trying over and over, never succeeding. "Is there any way to help her?" Jerry asked. "Can we somehow give her closure?" The professor sat down heavily in his chair. "I've spent years trying to answer that question. Some paranormal experts believe that if you can help a spirit complete their unfinished business, they can finally move on to whatever comes next. But how do you help someone who died 12 years ago reach a home she can never physically enter? How do you give closure to someone who's already dead?" Jerry didn't have an answer. The room fell silent except for the ticking of an old clock on the wall. Both men sat there, contemplating the impossible situation. A young girl trapped between worlds, endlessly trying to reach a home she would never see again. Professor Hartley pulled out another folder from his desk drawer. This one was labeled Intervention Attempts Vanishing Hitchhiker Cases. He opened it and spread several documents across his desk. "Over the years, many people have tried to help these trapped spirits," the professor explained. "Most attempts have failed, but I've documented them all. We can learn from what didn't work." Jerry picked up one of the reports. It described a case from Massachusetts where a priest had tried to perform an exorcism at the location where a vanishing hitchhiker appeared. "Did it work?" Jerry asked. "No," Professor Hartley said, shaking his head. "The priest performed the ritual multiple times, but the ghost continued to appear. You see, exorcisms are designed to cast out evil spirits or demons. But these hitchhiker ghosts aren't evil, they're just lost souls. An exorcism is the wrong tool for this problem." Another document described how a family in Ohio had tried to communicate with their daughter's ghost using a medium. The daughter had become a vanishing hitchhiker after dying in a car accident. The medium claimed to make contact with the spirit and tried to convince her to move on to the afterlife. "What happened?" Jerry asked. "The medium said the spirit was confused and didn't understand she was dead," Professor Hartley explained. "She kept insisting she needed to get home. The medium tried for hours to make her understand the truth, but it didn't work. The ghosts continued to appear on that highway for years afterward." Jerry felt increasingly hopeless as he read through the reports. In Arizona, paranormal investigators had set up cameras and recording equipment at a haunted location, hoping to gather evidence and somehow communicate with the spirit. They captured amazing footage of the ghost appearing and disappearing, but they couldn't interact with her in any meaningful way. In Tennessee, a family had actually tried moving their entire house to see if that would help their daughter's spirit find peace. The girl had been trying to reach that house when she died. The family thought maybe if they moved the house to a different location, it would break the spiritual connection. It didn't work. The ghost continued to appear at the location of the old house, even though the actual building was gone. "Every single attempt has failed," Jerry said, feeling defeated. "There's no way to help them, is there?" Professor Hartley was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that gave Jerry a small glimmer of hope. "Actually, there is one case where something different happened. It's not a complete success story, but it's the closest we've come to breaking the cycle. It happened in Louisiana just 2 years ago." Jerry sat up straight. "Tell me everything." Professor Hartley pulled out a special file marked Louisiana Case -1937. He handled it carefully, as if it contained precious information. "This case is different from all the others," he said. "It gives us hope that maybe, just maybe, these spirits can find peace." He opened the file and showed Jerry a photograph of a young African-American woman. This is Sarah Monroe. She died in 1925 at the age of 19. She was walking home from her job as a seamstress when a carriage struck her on a dark road outside New Orleans. For 12 years, she appeared as a vanishing hitchhiker on that same road.
Ow.
What made her case different? Jerry asked. Her younger sister Evelyn never stopped trying to help her, Professor Hartley explained. Evelyn was only 10 years old when Sarah died. She grew up hearing stories about people who had encountered Sarah's ghost. As Evelyn got older, she became determined to free her sister's spirit. The professor showed Jerry a series of letters written by Evelyn. Evelyn studied everything she could about ghosts and spirits. She talked to voodoo practitioners, Catholic priests, Native American spiritual leaders, anyone who might have knowledge about helping trapped souls. Finally, when she was 22 years old, she decided to try something no one had attempted before. What did she do? Jerry asked eagerly. Evelyn went to the exact spot where Sarah had been killed. She brought Sarah's favorite things, her sewing kit, her favorite dress, letters she had written. But most importantly, she brought something deeply personal. She brought the unfinished wedding dress Sarah had been sewing before she died. Jerry listened intently as the professor continued. Sarah had been engaged to be married. She was making her own wedding dress by hand, pouring all her love and dreams into every stitch. But she died 3 weeks before the wedding, and the dress was never completed. Evelyn spent the entire night at that spot, finishing the wedding dress. She sewed the final seams, added the last buttons, completed everything her sister had left undone, and as she worked, she talked to Sarah's spirit. She told her it was okay to let go. She told her that their mother had forgiven her for dying. She told her that her fiancé had eventually found love again and was happy. She gave Sarah permission to move on, and it worked. Jerry asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Professor Hartley nodded slowly. According to Evelyn and multiple witnesses, Sarah appeared one final time that night. She stood at the edge of the road, watching her sister complete the dress. When Evelyn finished the last stitch, Sarah smiled the first time anyone had ever seen the ghost smile. Then she faded away. She has never been seen since. Jerry's heart was racing as he processed this information. So it is possible, he said. We can help Mary. We just need to figure out what her unfinished business really is. Professor Hartley held up a cautionary hand. It's not that simple. Sarah's case worked because Evelyn knew exactly what her sister had left incomplete. The wedding dress was a clear, tangible piece of unfinished business. With Mary, we're not so sure what would bring her closure. But she's trying to get home, Jerry argued. That's obvious. Why's to reach her mother's house? Yes, but why? The professor asked. What does she need to do there? What does she need to say? Without knowing the specific reason, we can't complete the task for her. Simply bringing her to the house doesn't work. Dozens of people have already done that, and she still disappears before arriving. Jerry thought hard about this. He remembered Margaret Henderson's sad face, the tears in her eyes. Maybe we need to talk to her mother again. Maybe there's something Margaret knows about that last day, something Mary wanted to do or say. Professor Hartley nodded approvingly. That's good thinking. The key to helping these spirits is understanding the emotional core of their trauma. It's not just about the physical journey. It's about the emotional need that went unfulfilled. Jerry stood up, energized by this new possibility. I need to go back to Margaret. I need to ask her more questions about Mary's last day alive.
Yes.
There has to be something we're missing. Wait, Professor Hartley said, reaching into his desk. He pulled out a small leather journal and handed it to Jerry. "Take this. Document everything. Write down every detail Margaret tells you. The smallest fact might be the key to understanding Mary's true unfinished business." Jerry took the journal gratefully. "Thank you, Professor. This has been incredibly helpful." As Jerry was about to leave, Professor Hartley called out to him. "Jerry, I need to warn you about something. Trying to help a trapped spirit can be dangerous. Not because the spirit wants to harm you, but because you're dealing with forces we don't fully understand. The emotional energy around these hauntings can be intense. Some people who get too involved have reported nightmares, feelings of being watched, even temporary depression." "I don't care about the risks," Jerry said firmly. I saw Mary's face. I felt her sadness. If there's even a small chance I can help her find peace, I have to try. She's been suffering for 12 years. That's long enough. Professor Hartley smiled sadly. "You're a good man, Jerry. Mary is lucky that you were the one who picked her up that night. Most people would just want to forget the whole experience and move on with their lives." Jerry returned to Margaret Henderson's house the next day. As she opened the door, she looked tired and older than before. The dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't been sleeping well. "Jerry," she said with surprise, "I wasn't expecting to see you again. Please, come in." They sat in the same living room as before. Jerry noticed that Margaret had been looking through old photo albums. Pictures of Mary were spread across the coffee table, capturing moments from her childhood, birthdays, school days, and family gatherings. "Mrs. Henderson, I've been doing research," Jerry began carefully. "I met with a professor who studies these kinds of hauntings. He told me about a case where someone helped a trapped spirit find peace. But to do that, we need to understand exactly what Mary's unfinished business was." Margaret's hands trembled as she picked up one of the photographs. "I've thought about this every single day for 12 years, she whispered. "What was so important that it keeps my baby trapped in this terrible cycle?" "Tell me about the day she died," Jerry said gently. "What happened that morning? Did you two argue? Was there something left unsaid between you?" Margaret was silent for a long moment. Tears began rolling down her cheeks. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. "We did argue. That morning, before she left for school, it was a terrible argument, and I've regretted it every day since." Jerry leaned forward, listening carefully. This might be the key they needed. "Mary wanted to go to the dance that night," Margaret continued, her voice breaking. "But I told her she couldn't go. I had found out that the boy who asked her, Michael, was from a poor family. I was ashamed to admit it, but I was a snob back then. I thought my daughter deserved better than a boy whose father worked in a factory." Margaret wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. Mary was heartbroken. She begged me to let her go. She said she loved Michael and that he was a good person, that money didn't matter. But I refused. I said terrible things. I told her she was too young to know what love was. I told her she was being foolish. "What happened then?" Jerry asked softly. Mary stormed out of the house crying. Margaret said, "Those were our last moments together, angry and hurtful." When she came home from school that afternoon, she had the white dress hidden in her school bag. She had bought it with her own money that she'd been saving. She was planning to sneak out to the dance after I went to bed. Jerry felt his chest tighten. "So she did go to the dance?" Margaret nodded, sobbing. "Yes, she went behind my back. And when the boy couldn't drive her home because of their argument, she started walking home to face my anger. Margaret's tears flowed freely now as she continued her story. The police told me everything after the accident. Mary and Michael had argued at the dance because she was upset about lying to me. She felt guilty about sneaking out. Michael wanted to drive her home, but Mary said no. She was afraid that if I saw her arrive in his car, I would be even angrier. Jerry's heart ached as he listened. The tragedy was so much deeper than he had realized. Mary hadn't just been trying to get home. She had been trying to make things right with her mother. So she walked, Margaret continued, her voice shaking. She walked along that dark road in her beautiful white dress, probably thinking about what she would say to me. Maybe she was practicing an apology. Maybe she was scared of how I would react. We'll never know what was going through her mind in those final moments. And the driver who hit her never stopped? Jerry asked. Never, Margaret confirmed bitterly. They just left her there on the side of the road like she was nothing. Farmer found her the next morning. By then it was too late. My baby died alone in the cold and dark, probably calling out for me, and I wasn't there to help her. Margaret reached into a drawer and pulled out an envelope. After Mary died, I found this in her room. It's a letter she had started writing to me but never finished. She handed the letter to Jerry with trembling hands. The paper was old and yellowed, written in a young girl's careful handwriting. Jerry read it aloud. Dear Mama, I'm sorry for making you angry. I know you think I'm too young to understand love, but Michael makes me happy. He's kind and respectful, and he treats me like I matter. I wish you could see him the way I do. I wish you could see that having money isn't the same as having a good heart. I'm going to the dance tonight because I need to make my own choices sometimes, but I want you to know that I love you, and I'm not trying to hurt you. When I come home tonight, I hope we can talk without yelling. I hope you can forgive me and try to understand. I just want you to be proud of me and accept my decisions. I promise I'll always be your little girl no matter what. Love, Mary. The letter ended there. Mary had never finished writing it. She had never gotten the chance to make peace with her mother. She had never received her mother's forgiveness or blessing. That's it, Jerry said quietly, finally understanding. That's what Mary needs. She needs to deliver this message to you. She needs to know that you forgive her and that you're proud of her. Jerry and Margaret knew what they had to do. That very night, they returned to the spot near Resurrection Cemetery where Mary's ghost always appeared. Margaret brought the unfinished letter, along with photographs of Mary and Michael together that she had kept hidden all these years. The night was foggy, just like the night Jerry had first encountered Mary. They stood by the cemetery gates, waiting. Professor Hartley had also come, wanting to document what might happen. The three of them stood in the cold, their breath forming clouds in the dark air. What if she doesn't appear? Margaret asked nervously. She will, Jerry said with certainty. She's been trying to reach you for 12 years. Tonight you're finally here to meet her. They waited for over an hour. Just when Margaret was beginning to lose hope, Jerry saw her. The figure in the white dress standing exactly where he had seen her before. She's here, he whispered. Margaret turned and gasped. For the first time in 12 years, she was seeing her daughter again. Mary looked exactly as she had the night she died, young, beautiful, and sad. The ghost stood there, watching them with those haunting, sorrowful eyes. Margaret stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. Her hands shook as she held up the unfinished letter. Mary, my darling girl, I need you to hear me. I've been waiting so long to tell you this. The ghost of Mary tilted her head as if listening. I forgive you, Margaret said, her voice strong despite her tears. I forgive you for going to the dance. I forgive you for lying to me. I was wrong, baby. I was so wrong. Money doesn't matter. Love matters. Happiness matters. Michael was a good boy, and he made you happy. I should have seen that. Is given you my blessing. Mary's ghost took a step closer, her expression changing. The sadness seemed to lighten slightly. I'm proud that you stood up for what you believed in. I'm proud that you followed your heart. You were braver than I ever was. You were wise beyond your years, and I was too stubborn to see it. Margaret held out the letter. You tried to tell me all of this. You wrote it down because you knew I needed to hear it. Well, I heard you, my sweet girl. I understand now. And I want you to know that I've kept these pictures of you and Michael all these years. I visit his grave too, you know. He never married anyone else. He loved you until the day he died, 20 years later. The fog around them began to swirl strangely. Mary's ghost was glowing now, brighter than before.